Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of A Million Ways to Die in the West. Just a heads up, I had very little sleep last night, and I just got back from like a 5-hour family get-together filled with many, many little kids. I'm pretty sure they're breeding an army, and as much as I love them, they are very noisy and hyperactive, and I am just totally exhausted, and I feel incredibly dehydrated. Warm water, great stuff. So I'll probably be trying to make this review as short as possible, but we'll just have to see, won't we? So I was really eager to see this one. I actually thought the trailers looked hilarious, and I liked Seth MacFarlane's previous movie, Ted, a lot. In fact, I originally felt it was one of my favorite movies of its year, but when I watched it again on DVD, it didn't hold up quite as well. I still thought it was a really good comedy, but I'm definitely not going to feel the need to watch it once a year. Whereas stuff like, Young Frankenstein, which is one of my favorite comedies, I'll probably watch once every other month. But it looked hilarious, and I was really disappointed when the reviews came in, and for the most part, people were very unenthusiastic at best. In fact, if anybody felt strongly about it, it was because they really hated this movie. So my expectations had to be pulled way to the ground to the point where I expected nothing, because I really wanted to have a good time with A Million Ways to Die in the West, and it seemed like the only way I'd get that is if I expected to watch something on par with the last comedy I viewed, which was Delivery Man. And so yeah, I had to go pretty low. But I went ahead and saw it because, once again, if I really want to see something, bad reviews aren't going to stop me. And was it as bad as I felt people made it out to be? No, but I definitely can't say this was a very good comedy. I think I would have enjoyed it more if I watched it as a rental. If I just, it was a Netflix movie, I think I would have had a much more positive experience, flaws and all. Because I do think that the funny parts, or the funniest parts, were really funny. I don't know if I'm going to ever be quoting anything, but I thought, I like Seth MacFarlane's, irreverent, ironic style of humor, and I enjoyed it whenever he'd poke fun at the time period. There are definitely a lot of inside jokes, but maybe it's because I am a Western enthusiast that I got a lot of those inside jokes. So, a random bit that made me laugh was how nobody smiles, when taking a picture. But even then, that sort of ties into one of my main flaws, in that every time it strikes gold with a joke, it'll just keep exploiting that same joke over and over again to where it started to eventually become old. I think it would have been funnier if they just left it as, whenever you see a picture, nobody is smiling. But they have to explain why nobody's smiling, and when they find out that somebody did smile in a photo once, they have to make such a big deal about it. And so it kind of ruined its own momentum, because it knew the joke in itself was pretty good. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe they were afraid that nobody would get it, so they had to go all out and explain why it's supposed to be funny. And unfortunately, that's not the only time that happened, too. Remember that part in the previews where she comes in that dress that simulates a big backside, and Seth MacFarlane says, if I was a black guy, this would be a mean trick to play on me. That part, it wasn't one of the funnier moments from the previews, but it would have worked fine, except they go on and once again explain why that is supposed to be funny, which I thought was totally unnecessary. And A Million Ways to Die in the West is like a 2-hour-long movie. It did not need all of this filler. This isn't one of those cases like A Haunted House where they seem to have only like 20-25 minutes worth of actual material, so they had to stretch that out into an 80-minute movie so they can get it released in theaters. I really think that if they cut this movie down to an hour and a half, the reviews would have been much more positive, because I did feel there was enough material to warrant that kind of running time, but instead A Million Ways to Die in the West is 30 minutes longer than it really needed to be. So that really hurt the pacing, and God, the tone is another big issue this movie has. So you'll have this, real goofy, slapsticky scene with Seth MacFarlane that's at least supposed to make you laugh. Whether you think it's funny or not is a total different matter. But then it'll cut to a scene with Liam Neeson. Now, Liam Neeson's character is, for the most part, not played for laughs. He is a straight-up, ruthless, vicious, almost scary criminal, and every scene he is in is played as an intense thriller, not a comedy at all. So, talk about mood whiplash, especially his introduction scene. I never laughed once in that scene, and I don't think I was supposed to. And then it'll go back to, once again, silly, goofy hijinks from Seth MacFarlane's character. And then, occasionally even that will kind of fall off the wagon. It will become a bit too depressing and awkward to be funny, especially when it comes to his interactions with, his former love interest, the girl who, Amanda Seyfried's character. The plot of this movie is they were a couple. She dumped him because he was too weak. He meets Charlize, I don't know how you pronounce her name, Charlize Theron's character, and she decides that she likes this guy, so she's going to help him win her back by making him tougher. I've seen this story done way too many times before, so I almost feel like I'm watching a Western with some scenes, or not a Western, a romance that just happens to take place in the West. And a lot of those scenes aren't really intended to be funny either. They're very sappy, they're very sweet. And it's like, I hate it when comedies forget to be real comedies. I recently watched Delivery Man with Vince Vaughn. It has enough, I don't want to say funny moments, but enough comedic moments that they could use in the trailer so they can con you into thinking you're going to watch a comedy, but then the rest of the movie is almost a straight-up drama. This isn't that bad. It just goes from comedy to thriller to romance to comedy and so on. So I could never really figure out what kind of movie A Million Ways to Die in the West really wanted to be. Now, originally I was going to make a comparison with The Lone Ranger, the one that came out a year or two ago, because both films are westerns and both films fall victim to bipolar tones. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how, even though both movies suffer from a lot of the same problems, how they get there was very different. In the case of The Lone Ranger, it was not a comedy. It was an action flick that was more interested in delivering spectacle over anything else. It just happened to contain comedy and drama, much like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies did. The problem was that the drama and the comedy did not go very well together. The drama was much too bleak and depressing, whereas the comedy was too over-the-top and slapstick-oriented, and so that created a clash and embodied how The Lone Ranger was just not a very good movie. It was very unfocused and sloppy. In the case of A Million Ways to Die in the West, I actually felt like they had a decent comedy here. They had a decent thriller because Liam Neeson is genuinely imposing, and, Seth MacFarlane does do a decent job at building suspense in regards to how that character is used. And you know what? I actually thought the romance was surprisingly okay. I thought Seth MacFarlane and Charlize Theron had decent chemistry together, and I like how you could tell they adore each other just based on their body language and how they deliver their lines, even though the lines themselves have nothing to do with their relationship. They talk about all sorts of bullshit, but you could tell how they're growing more attracted to each other based on how they say them. Whereas with most romances, it's just the couples will talk about nothing except their relationship and how much they adore each other, and I think that gets really old really fast. So you have a decent thriller, a decent comedy, and a decent romance. The problem is that none of them go very well together. They're constantly fighting for the top spot of this movie. So imagine the finale of Blazing Saddles, where you have the cast of a Western breaking down the fourth wall and getting into a fight with, the cast of a musical. that's pretty much a metaphor for this movie. None of them really acquire the victory they wanted to me, the thriller parts undermine the comedy, and the comedy undermined the thriller, and the romance undermined both, and both undermined the romance. Because, yeah, even though there are some funny scenes within the more romance-oriented sequences, for the most part, I just felt like it was playing out as a straight-up love story. Characters discussing their problems, why they hate the West, and so on, and their goals. And it's often more sad or even sweet than it is funny. It's just they don't go well to the slapstick, dark comedy that Seth MacFarlane obviously prefers to make. So they should have cut all that down, cut it all down to like a 90-minute comedy, tone down the serious parts. Don't focus so much on the relationship, because that's not why we're watching this movie, and I would have really enjoyed myself. Instead, I only enjoyed myself in parts. But at least the parts I enjoyed were pretty enjoyable. I still think I would have liked this film much more if I saw it on the small screen, though, because overall it's just a maybe a 2.5 star movie. Should you watch it? It's up to you whether this sounds like it could appeal to your sensibilities. If you've really already made up your mind, I don't think I could stop you. But if you're kind of on the fence, I just say wait until it comes out on DVD. And if you did not like Ted, or you hate Seth MacFarlane in general, or you don't like Westerns, then maybe I wouldn't bother at all. So that is all I have to say. I have done written reviews of Dracula, Prince of Darkness, starring Christopher Lee, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. So read those. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And yes, I have started production on both Critiquing the Critics and my Kick-Ass of Awesome episodes. So those might actually get released around the same time. Hopefully one will be done this week. But I am working on those. So thanks for watching this video. I need to rest before I go to work in an hour. So I'll see you guys later.